미를 형태에 접목시키게 되었습니다. 그래서 요즘에는 이제 설치 작업도 많이 하는 것 같아요. 보통은 컵 같은 경우는 최종 완성까지 한 3주에서 4주 정도 소요가 되고요. 큰 작업 같은 경우는 한 3달까지도 걸리는 작업들도 있는 것 같아요. 저 같은 경우는 창같이 복잡한 패턴들을 함께 구성을 하다 보니까 정말 많이 갈라져요. 그래서 재벌 가마에 들어가 있을 때가 가장 긴장되는 순간인 것 같습니다. 사실 공간이라는 것이 볼 수도 없고 만질 수도 없는 어떠한 무형의 어떤 것이잖아요. 그거를 이제 빛이나 그림자나 무형의 어떤 요소들을 활용해서 같이 공감할 수 있는 작업을 하고 싶습니다.
Global heritage will unite. We share brilliant values and honor the world's most cherished legacies to pass our heritage on to future generations. Busan invites you, the 48th session of UNESCO World Heritage Committee, July 2026, Busan, Korea.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Report for this Tuesday, January 20th here in South Korea. President Lee Jae-myung centered on diplomacy and defense during this week's cabinet meeting held earlier this morning, following his back-to-back summits with his counterparts in China, Japan and from Italy, amid backlash from North Korea over drone incursions. Our top office correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
President Lee Jae-myung opened Tuesday's cabinet meeting by strongly condemning alleged civilian drone launches into North Korea, calling them, quote, an act of war.
이 전쟁 개성이나 마찬가지죠. 북한 적이 총 쏜 거하고 똑같잖아요.
His remarks came after Pyongyang claimed it had shot down drones flown from South Korea once last September and again earlier this month. 2 civilian suspects are now under investigation by a joint military police task force. Local media reports say the suspects worked for the presidential office under the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration. President Lee has ordered a thorough investigation and is calling for strict punishment for those responsible. He also urged the defense minister to tighten loopholes in the military surveillance and monitoring systems.
그리고 남북 사이에 이런 신뢰가 깨지지 않도록 또 적대의 감정이 제고되지 않도록 최선으로 잘 관리하시기 바랍니다.
Tuesday's cabinet meeting also reviewed follow-up measures from President Lee's recent visits to China and Japan. The focus was on ways to better preserve and manage the Korean provisional government in Shanghai, the government in exile established by independence activists during Japan's colonial rule. Lee visited the site during his trip to China 2 weeks ago.
대한민국 정부의 일종의 발상지 아닙니까? 이 중요한 사진은 역사적 시설물인데 이거 너무 오랫동안 방치해놨던 것 같습니다.
The Foreign Ministry says it will work with the Chinese government to establish formal preservation agreements or memorandums of understanding to ensure long-term institutionalized cooperation. The Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs plans to secure additional units of the complex to open more exhibition halls and souvenir shops. Now, meanwhile, looking back on his trip to Japan, President Lee said he and Prime Minister Takaichi hope to hold their next summit in his hometown of Andong as part of their back-and-forth leader-level diplomacy. Their latest talks were held in Nara Prefecture, Prime Minister Takaichi's hometown, last week. 송유진, Arirang News.
North Korea is ramping up its anti-South Korea rhetoric. According to the regime state media, new exhibits at the Central Class Education House in Pyongyang include banners calling South Korea the primary enemy. The exhibits also feature Article 3 of South Korea's constitution that defines the Korean peninsula as its territory. Pyongyang is reportedly using this definition to claim that Seoul is seeking forced unification. Pundits believe North Korea is working to actively push this hostile narrative among its young people. In other news, South Korean retail investors have been betting big on U.S. stocks with their holdings soaring past 250 trillion won, and authorities here are now hoping to lure them back. Our Kim Jun-hong reports.
South Korean retail investors are ramping up overseas stock purchases despite currency pressure. Data from the Korea Securities Depository show the holdings surpassed 250 trillion won, or about $170.5 billion as of last Thursday, up nearly $6.9 billion in just 2 weeks. As overseas stock buying accelerates, the authorities are rolling out tax incentives to draw investor funds back home. The Ministry of Economy and Finance unveiled a package of tax incentives on Tuesday, aimed at boosting the domestic capital market. As part of the plan, the government will offer tax incentives to long-term investors in its National Growth Fund, set to be launched in the first half of the year. Investors who maintain their investment for at least 3 years will qualify for income tax deductions of up to 40%, with dividends taxed separately at 9%. Details were also spelled out for reshoring investment accounts. Investors who sell overseas shares and reinvest the proceeds in domestic stocks through these accounts will receive temporary tax breaks on capital gains. Despite the incentives, experts see a limited short-term impact as state-backed funds are geared toward long-term investments, while overseas stocks attract investors seeking quick gains.
Most retail investors in U.S. markets focus on short-term gains, which makes government-led policies less appealing. For these measures to work, the government needs to maintain a consistent policy stance and build trust that the market is worth investing in.
The government is also weighing the introduction of higher leverage investment products, loosening the current 2x cap to steer risk-hungry investors back from overseas markets to domestic stocks. Kim Jun-hong, Arirang News.
Producer prices here rose for the fourth month in a row in December, despite a decline in global energy prices as the South Korean currency remained weak. According to the Bank of Korea, the producer price index stood at 121.76 in December, up 0.4% on month and 1.9% on year. Farm and fishery products were up 3.4% on month, with apple prices soaring nearly 20%. Among manufactured goods, prices of computers, electronic and optical equipment jumped 2.3%, driven by a 15.1% increase in DRAM prices. Samsung's OLED TVs have earned top ratings from leading U.S. consumer publication Consumer Reports. Several Samsung OLED TV models, along with a QLED TV, were reportedly tapped as the best sets in the publication's latest evaluation. This achievement builds on Samsung's remarkable success at this year's CES earlier this month, where its massive 130-inch micro RGB TV was named the winner in the Best of Innovation category. Meanwhile, as the words of wisdom go, one man's crisis may be another man's opportunity. That being said, we take a look at efforts underway by online retailers to fill the vacuum left by e-commerce giant Coupang. Our Kim Do-yeon files this report.
The controversy over Coupang's massive data breach affecting 33.7 million of its customers and its retribution method has shifted the dynamics of the online retail sector. It has translated into a direct opportunity for rivals who are now rolling out massive coupon packs and incentives to lock in these drifting consumers. SSG.com has seen immediate gains. From January 1st to the 19th, the average number of new daily visitors skyrocketed by 240% compared to last year, according to the company. This traffic is converting into actual sales. Between January 8th and the 19th, first-time orders surged 70% on year, driven largely by the new membership, which locks in customers with high reward rates. To sustain this momentum, the company is aggressively expanding its infrastructure, planning to increase its delivery hubs from 60 to 90 by the first half of the year. Market Curly is also a primary beneficiary. In December, the company says that monthly active users hit a record 4.49 million, a 34% jump from the previous year. The number of daily active users on January 12th was up 47% compared to the day breach occurred in late November. Curly projects a 20% spike in its gross merchandise volume for December. Fashion platform Mushinsa is also riding the wave, reporting a 46% increase in daily new subscribers during the first 2 weeks of the month as it rolled out coupons. And now the company announced another series of coupons with an illustration resembling Coupang's logo. Experts say this redistribution of market share could lead to a healthier industry structure.
A market dominated by a single player is rarely desirable. If this opportunity allows competitors to step up and a healthy competitive structure is established, it will ultimately lead to lower prices and higher quality services for consumers.
The market shift comes as Coupang was estimated to have more than a quarter of the country's e-commerce market up until last year. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi is dissolving the House of Representatives on the opening day of the ordinary diet session this coming Friday to set the stage for a snap general election on February 8th. Our Ian Jin has details.
During a press conference on Monday, Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi announced plans to dissolve the Japanese House of Representatives this Friday, January 23rd, which would mark Takaichi's first electoral test since becoming Japan's first female prime minister in October.
Today, as Prime Minister, I have decided to dissolve the House of Representatives on January 23rd. I stake my position as Prime Minister on this decision. I ask the people of Japan to directly judge whether they can entrust the governance of the nation to Sanai Takaichi.
This would trigger a snap general election for all 465 seats in the lower house of parliament, which will be announced on January 27th, followed by voting to be held on February 8th. This plan for a swift election with the country's shortest ever 16-day campaign period is to minimize the impact on economic policies affecting livelihoods and rising prices. Addressing concerns that the Takaichi cabinet has not yet been tested in an election where the public chooses the government, the move is aimed at asking the public to decide to show support for the administration. Takaichi wants voter support for higher spending, tax cuts, and a new security strategy expected to accelerate Japan's defense buildup. Her policy promises a 2-year halt to an 8% consumption tax on food. She also said her spending plans would create jobs, boost household spending, and increase other tax revenues. Takaichi was elected Japan's first female prime minister on October 21st last year by lawmakers in a parliamentary vote. The snap election, intended to solidify her position as leader, comes with its own risks. Since its foundation in 1955, the Liberal Democratic Party has dominated Japanese politics, but recently lost ground amid frustration with the economy, demographic decline, and social discontent. Her immediate predecessor, Shigeru Ishiba, also announced the snap election shortly after taking office, which resulted in one of the LDP's worst ever results, costing the party its majority in the lower house. The February 8th election will test Japan's voter sentiment on higher government spending at a time when the public's top concern remains the rising cost of living. 이은진, Arirang News.
Also, on the international front, U.S. President Donald Trump has reaffirmed his resolve to slap punitive tariffs on the 8 NATO nations that recently sent soldiers to Greenland in response to his demand for that territory. Our Park Junan has the latest.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday reaffirmed that tariffs on countries that oppose his plans to acquire Greenland would be fully implemented unless an agreement is reached. He has repeatedly said that U.S. control of Greenland is vital for national security and to protect against external threats. With U.S. security central to Trump's plan, Denmark's Defense Minister Troels Lund Poulsen on Monday proposed a NATO surveillance mission in Greenland, signaling that European NATO allies are taking Arctic defense seriously. Poulsen, alongside Greenland's foreign minister, met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Brussels, where Rutte expressed hope that a framework could be established. Trump's tariffs, which are set to begin at 10% on February 1st and rise to 25% by June 1st, target 8 countries, including Denmark, Sweden, and France. Taking to social media, EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Kaja Kallas reiterated that Arctic security is a shared transatlantic interest, but stressed that tariff threats are not the right approach. She emphasized that the EU has no interest in picking a fight, but will hold its ground, adding that it has a range of tools to protect its interests. Meanwhile, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, dismissed European retaliatory tariffs as very unwise.
The president is looking at Greenland as a strategic asset for the United States. We are not going to outsource our hemispheric security to anyone else. I think it would be very unwise. So thank you.
Right. EU leaders will hold a summit on Thursday where options, including a tariff on U.S. goods worth around $108 billion, will be discussed. Trump will address the WEF on Wednesday as the standoff shows no signs of easing. Park Junan, Arirang News.
Back here on the local front, South Korea woke up to frigid conditions on this Tuesday, which reportedly marks the start of the strongest and longest cold wave for this winter. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Tuesday marks Taehan, the coldest day of the year according to Korea's traditional calendar, and is living up to its name as severe cold grips the country. In Seoul, wind chill temperatures are expected to fall as low as minus 18 degrees Celsius. A surge of cold air moving south from the north since Sunday night is driving frigid conditions nationwide. Cold wave advisories have been issued for most parts of the country, with the exception of the East Coast and parts of Jeollanam-do Province, Gyeongsang-nam-do Province, and Jeju Island. A higher-level cold wave warning is in effect for northeastern Gyeonggi-do Province and much of western Gangwon-do Province, where conditions are especially severe. Morning temperatures in central regions are expected to drop below minus 10 degrees Celsius on Tuesday. Southern regions will also see sub-zero readings, ranging from minus 10 to minus 5 degrees. Across the country, morning lows are forecast to range from minus 17 to minus 2 degrees Celsius, while daytime highs will remain cold between minus 4 and 7 degrees. Forecasters say the cold snap will persist through the rest of the week. In Seoul, morning temperatures are expected to remain below minus 10 degrees Celsius through Sunday. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, on the cultural front, Korean musicals celebrated a year of remarkable achievements this past Monday with an annual ceremony to honor the best. Our Cho Young-eun was there.
The Korean Musical Awards celebrated its 10th anniversary in Seoul on Monday and also marked a historic high for the number of submitted productions for this year's event. The grand prize went to The Man in Hanbok, while Maybe Happy Ending and Granny Poetry Club won in the Best Musical Awards category.
We will be back soon with an encore performance, reborn as The Man in Hanbok, with an even more evolved presence.
The Bridges of Madison County earned both Best Actor and Best Actress honors, awarded to Park Eun-tae and Cho Jung-eun. Among the standout works was Behind the Moon, a one-man musical about Apollo 11 astronaut Michael Collins. The writer describes standing on stage as part of the creative team as an especially meaningful moment.
When I was studying musical theater in New York, my professors often said, people should go to Korea rather than Broadway. That was about 10 years ago. Today, with the rise of so many outstanding original Korean musicals, I believe we can say that with confidence.
Korean musicals saw remarkable growth over the past year, marked by a surge in productions, rising audience engagement, and increasing recognition both at home and abroad.
As Korean musicals mark their 60-year history, they are continuing to evolve in dynamic ways. A wide range of original productions is being developed, and many are actively expanding overseas.
Since the curtain first rose in 1966, original Korean musicals have undergone 6 decades of rapid and dynamic growth. From small local productions to globally recognized original works, the industry has continued to evolve at a remarkable pace. As Korean musicals celebrate their 60th anniversary, the industry is now poised to take on greater global challenges, expanding its reach on the international stage. Cho Young-eun, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. Spanish officials warn the death toll may still rise from Sunday's train crash that has killed at least 40 people. The crash happened near Ademuz in Andalusia at 7:45 p.m. Sunday, when the rear of the Malaga to Madrid train derailed, then slammed into an oncoming Madrid to Huelva train on a neighboring track. The impact threw multiple carriages off the rails, sending them down a 4-meter slope. Officials say some victims were found hundreds of meters from the site. Rescue crews are still searching wrecked train carriages for more bodies. Spain's government declared 3 days of national mourning as investigators work to determine why a modern train on a newly renovated track derailed. U.S. President Donald Trump is set to meet global business elites in Davos on Wednesday, turning the World Economic Forum into a stage for U.S. economic and geopolitical pressure. The White House has invited top executives across finance, crypto, and consulting to a reception hosted by Trump following his special address to the World Economic Forum. The meetings take place against the backdrop of Trump's recent moves, including tariff threats against Europe and demands linked to Greenland, dominate closed-door talks among global leaders. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned Europe not to retaliate, urging allies to take the president's intentions seriously. Security advisors from multiple nations will also convene on the sidelines of the summit. Russia launched a large-scale drone assault on Ukraine's energy system overnight, cutting electricity to 5 regions amid freezing temperatures. Ukrainian officials said on Monday that Moscow fired 145 drones, with air defenses downing most, but several strikes still damaged critical power and gas infrastructure in Odessa, Kharkiv, Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk, and Chernihiv. Energy companies report tens of thousands of households without electricity as emergency crews race to restore power. Italian fashion legend Valentino has died at age 93. The Valentino Garavani and Giancarlo Giametti Foundation confirmed his death on Monday in a public statement, stating that Valentino died at home in Rome. For nearly 5 decades, Valentino dressed royals, first ladies, and Hollywood stars, building one of Italy's most influential luxury fashion houses and defining red carpet elegance with his signature Valentino red. Italy and the global fashion world are now mourning a designer who shaped modern high fashion. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
A severe cold snap has kicked in on Daehan, a season term that means the coldest time of the year. Cold wave warnings and advisories are in place across the country, except for parts of the south and Jeju Island. Seoul plunged to minus 11.8 degrees Celsius this morning, the coldest it has been so far this winter. It seems like this cold isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Mornings will get even colder throughout the week. Even during the day, many areas will stay below freezing. With gusty winds added in, it will feel even colder than the actual readings. The morning will stay icy cold tomorrow, with Chuncheon at minus 15 degrees, Daegu at minus 9 degrees. Highs will only rise to minus 5 degrees in Seoul, minus 3 degrees in Daejeon. Over the next few days, snow and rain clouds will appear around the Jeollado, Chungcheongnam-do provinces and Jeju Island. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this short break is our daily panel session, so do stay with us and thank you for now.
Right now, the new shopping game is starting.
On Press Perspective today, the South Korean won remains vulnerable against major currencies, while the country's stock market maintains its bull run. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome to the program. It's Tuesday, January 20th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today we talk about the South Korean stock market rally as well as its weakening won and the Trump administration's latest tariff on certain chips. For more on this, I have Celia Fioretti with French daily Le Croix here in the studio. Celia, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
I also have Professor Kim Jin-il at Korea University joining our talk virtually. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
So for having me.
Right, we shall start here in the studio. Celio, let's start with this week's action on the local bourse following its stellar performance last week.
Yeah, exactly. Let's start with the numbers. After last week's strong rally, South Korea stock market extended its gain this week with the benchmark KOSPI closing at a fresh all-time high of just over 4,900 points, up about 1.3% on the day. Intraday, it briefly touched nearly 4,917, underlining the momentum still driving the market. Year to date, the index is now up more than 16%. And the rally, however, is being powered by a very narrow group of stocks. Semiconductor giants, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, for example. They continue to rise, with Samsung hitting the symbolic 150,000 won level for the first time in its history. And autos also stood up, with Hyundai Motors surged more than 16%, overtaking LG Energy Solution, for example. But foreign investors remain the main drivers of this trend, buying more than 550 billion wons worth of shares, even as retail and institutional investors sold that much. That concentration is precisely what's worrying a bit the experts. Over the past month, Samsung and SK Hynix alone accounted for nearly 2/3 of the increase of KOSPI market capitalization, making the market increasingly sensible to the global shift in the economy, especially when we talk about semiconductors prices and all the tariff that comes into place these days. And that vulnerability was underscored by fresh warning from Washington about possible tariff chip makers facing what they want to expand their production in the U.S. if they want to face tariffs hikes. And at the same time, domestically focused stocks and smaller companies continue to lag in investment, creating what policymakers describe as a K-shaped market, in Korean uniqueness once again. And despite record high, many Korean investors are still shifting money to the US and not investing in the domestic market. So we'll see if that trend will follow, but it will highly depend on international market, international policies also.
Right, indeed. And Professor Kim, as Celia just mentioned, quite a number of analysts have voiced concern of the reality that the stock market rallies in recent times are being led largely by chips and cars. Do you share these concerns, Professor Kim?
So yes, as Celia just described, this K-shaped economy or K-shaped market, that's characterize the Korean market very well at the moment. And the two chip companies, of course, are at the forefront, the Hyundai car companies. I don't know whether it's car company or other it's kind of a broader based company right now, but these three companies provide more than 2/3 of the gains in the last couple of weeks, for sure. And that itself is not a problem, but whenever we face any crisis, or even though not crisis, any headwinds, as we may face soon from Washington, the Korean economy as a whole could get into trouble. And that's why many people or many economists are warning that we should not put all the eggs in one basket, basically. But right now, the three companies are doing really well, the two semiconductor companies and the Hyundai Motor. And that's the one Korea is kind of relying on right now and that's the K-shaped market or K-shaped economy at the moment. The K for two meanings. First, for Korea, K, and K in the uppercase K when it's shaping into two different directions. And maybe only three companies are at the upper part of the letter K, and other companies are in the bottom part of the letter K. And that could create a problem if headwinds blew to these three big companies.
Right, and before we touch upon that particular headwind then, Celia, the South Korean currency against this backdrop remains vulnerable against major currencies, even in spite of a rare vote of confidence, if you will, by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Indeed, the South Korean won remain under pressure from the foreign exchange market, and the currency is still trading near 1,400 won to the dollar, close to its weakest level since the global financial crisis in 2009. What makes this episode notable is the intervention inward of the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who rarely comments on individual currencies, but he openly said that the recent depreciation of the won is excessive and not consistent with South Korea's economic fundamentals, stressing that an excessive volatility in the currency market is undesirable, and those remarks briefly lifted the won by about 1%, but the effect remained quite short-lived. The broader context explain why, while the dollars has softened against many major currencies, several Asian currencies, including the won and the Japanese yen, have continued to weaken over the months. For Korea, pressure has intensified since the start of the year, driven by global risk aversion, concerns over U.S. trade and investment demands, and expectation that the Bank of Korea will keep its interest rate on hold rather than tightening the policy. And authorities have already tried to stabilize the won through the market intervention and currency hedging by public funds. But the trend has reversed. Analysts warn that a verbal support from the White House, from Washington, can only go so far. If investor remains uneasy about global trade friction that we see these days and domestic political uncertainty, fundamentals alone might not be enough to bend the curve the other way. And so, in short, the message from the U.S. Helps at the margin, but the one vulnerability is deeper, is structural, and depending on external pressure, it's unlikely that the trend will change in the coming weeks.
Right. Professor Kim, the International Monetary Fund has warned that South Korea's dollar asset exposure far exceeds its foreign exchange market size by over 20 times. Could you explain this warning for us and its implications for the local currency?
So that was reported in last year's, I think it's October, Global Financial Stability Report, which is basically reviewing the state of the world from the financial stability perspective. And they emphasize that some countries' dollar exposure is too much. So it's basically, it could be a good sign or bad sign for Korea. It's a good sign for Korea because Korea now is rich enough to own foreign assets more than before. But it could be a risk because if exchange rates become volatile, the value of these assets could also become volatile as well. And that's why IMF is warning South Korea and many other countries like Taiwan as well, and that their dollar exposure is too much. When they say too much, it's relative to how much dollar liquidity they have. And Korea is certainly in that range. So for the IMF, whenever there's a big shock around the world, this exposure to the dollar is a big risk. But for Korea, it could be another story because Korea has an incentive to accumulate more dollar assets in case of the future need. So it goes kind of both ways. So IMF is warning about that. So we should be monitoring about the movement of the exchange rates and also the movement of the world capital markets very carefully so that this risk does not materialize to the Korean economy in the near future.
Professor Kim, with regard to the South Korean currency, I understand this may be the million-dollar question, but what are your suggestions to steady the South Korean won?
So it's basically a view perspective on whether the current level is appropriate or not. So many people in Korea they are thinking of, or they are thinking about the good old days of lower exchange rates, but that, I think, period is gone. As you are showing here, won is near its 17-year low. For the last 17 years, since 2009, I believe, Korea has been going through the swing of exchange rates. And I cannot tell what the exact rate is, but for the government, it's their strategy that unless exchange rates move too much to the upper level or too much in the south, they want to maintain the exchange in the band. And that, of course, is helping the financial markets because they can make some money out of it, but that's their business. So as far as won is stabilized within a certain bounds without hitting a major crisis, and that's the band we should get accustomed to, not only for the policymakers, but also for the country as a whole. So that way, this weak one, or relative to a few years ago, right, is not comfortable to some people, but we have to face it, and we have to live, or we have to learn how to live with this level exchange rates when they stabilize around the levels as they are right now. And that way, whenever Korean government intervene, as Silio mentioned a minute ago, that was around the Christmas last year, and that intervention could be effective. And that's the way we can understand the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent's comment as well. And as Silio mentioned, I think he said something like, it can go so far. Yeah, and that's the way we should view the weak one in this new juncture.
All right, I suppose that's the new reality then. Along with concerns over the weaker Korean won, Silio, last Wednesday, I believe, US President Donald Trump announced a new 25% tariff on some high-end computing chips entering the American market. And then the following day, he offered tariff relief to Taiwan in return for a $250 billion chip investment. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Exactly. This sequence of announcement really shows the transactional logic of the U.S. economic policy under President Trump, especially in strategic sectors like the semiconductors. As you said, last Wednesday, the White House unveiled a new 25% tariff on certain high-end computing chips, framing it as a national security measure aimed at reshoring some critical technologies back in the U.S. And the move immediately raised alarm in Asia, and especially in South Korea and in Taiwan, which sit at the center of the global semiconductor supply chain. Just one day later, as you mentioned, however, Washington shifted gears. The Trump administration struck a deal with Taipei, offering a significant tariff relief in exchange for massive investment in the U.S. And under the agreement, Taiwanese chip and technology companies are expected to invest at least $250 billion to expand semiconductor manufacturing capacity on U.S. soil, backed by credit guarantees from the Taiwanese government. In return, the so-called reciprocal tariff on Taiwan are capped at 15%, down from 20%, with additional exemption on pharmaceutical, aircraft components, and selected raw materials. The message is clear: build in America and you'll be exempted from tariff, and stay offshore and you'll have strong tariff hitting you sharply, in case some up to 100%, as Trump announced. And Taiwan flagship chip maker TSMC had already signaled room for further expansion into near its Arizona facilities in the US, building on $40 billion investment, supplying firms like Apple or Nvidia. And more broadly, this deal illustrates how tariffs are being used nowadays by Trump. It's not just protecting the economy, but it's really a leverage to force other economies to abide by what Trump's wants. And now the question is, between Taiwan and Korea, who will get a better deal? Who will get the edge to seduce the American market and to keep working with companies like Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft? And the competition is high now between South Korea and Taiwan.
Right, and staying with that, Professor Kim, Trade Minister Johan Gu delayed his return to Seoul from Washington, D.C. following Mr. Trump's new chip tariff. And upon his return to Seoul, claimed that the new tariff will have limited impact on South Korean exporters. Keeping in mind Taiwan's latest deal with the U.S., Professor Kim, what are your thoughts?
Well, when I was told that he delayed his return, it reminds me of another incident like a few months ago when the Korean finance minister, who is also deputy prime minister, canceled his trip to Washington a few weeks ago, right? I think he was even in the Incheon airport when his trip was canceled. At least Minister Yo was not at the New York airport, at least. So that shows how urgent, the matter is. And then he talked to 24 hours more about what exactly is behind this new announcement, or the Trump announcement. And then the way, I think you are showing it on TV right now, the way he is talking after his return, it's comforting that he is dealing with the U.S. and then in a satisfactory way. And of course, it's all transactional. As Celia mentioned, it's based on the negotiation with President Trump. And the competition is ongoing, and it all depends on how Taiwan and South Korea deals with these trade negotiations. And a lot is on the stake, of course, for the two countries, especially for Korea, because the two semiconductor companies is having a big portion of the Korean economy, especially in the stock market. And in that way, we should be still kind of vigilant in watching what will be done in the near future. And that's, fortunately or unfortunately, the new state of the world after January of last year.
Right. Celia, also staying in the U.S. then, the Justice Department that has reportedly opened investigation into Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, apparently sparking much backlash. Could you give us some context?
Yeah, this investigation into the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, is generating intense backlash because many observers see it as a direct challenge to one of the core pillar of U.S. economic governance, the independence of the central bank. Formally, the Justice Department is examining the cost overrun tied to renovation at the Federal Reserve's Washington headquarters, as well as allegation that Jerome Powell misled the Congress during its testimony. But critics argue that the legal rationale there is quite thin, especially that far larger cost overruns elsewhere have gone unnoticed by the government. According to multiple analysis, including reporting by the Wall Street Journal, the broader context matters more than the charges themselves. Since returning to the office, President Trump has systematically moved to bring independent federal institutions under tighter control, political control by the White House, removing officials deemed insufficiently loyal or weakening legal and procedural safeguard. In that light, Powell probe is widely interpreted as a warning shot, not only to Jerome Powell, but who is set to step down in May, by the way, but to whoever succeeded him in the chair. The message is clear: monetary policy decisions that run counter to the presidential will may carry personal and legal consequences. It's really a way for Trump to show who's in charge. It's a demonstration of power to make sure that everybody follow his economic policy, his economic vision. And that raised serious concern in Washington and also in Wall Street. The Federal Reserve credibility rests on its ability to be independent and to set interest rates free from any political pressure. If that independence erodes, then the market fear a greater volatility, weaker inflation control, and a loss of confidence in the U.S. institutions. So in short, it's less about the renovation budget that the Trump administration shows up front. It's more about the balance of power between the White House and the central bank.
Right, and perhaps with that in mind, Professor Kim, global central bank leaders, including BOK Governor Lee Chang-yong, have spoken of solidarity with Jerome Powell in an unprecedented show of support. What do you suppose the significance of this gesture?
The gesture or this signing off by, I think, 10 central bankers and 2 senior officials from BIS is they kind of wrote a letter saying that central bank independence is important. Actually, when you're showing this video footage of both Powell and Trump in construction head, that's the construction site, and the chit-chat between the two at that time, I think became a personal matter. That's what I am worrying about. And I worked in that building in the U.S. Central Bank for about 10 years myself, so I could go on and on. But for the central bank, both in Korea and in the U.S. and many other countries, the independence is important because if the administration or the president controls the central bank, then they have an incentive for the right reason, because they would like to get support in their election. So that's why most of the countries, through their legislation, is giving power of monetary policy to independent central banks. And that has been in danger in many countries, like, as you heard from Turkey and in other countries. And US was kind of a lone star in that league, but starting with the Trump 2.0, their central bank independence is in danger. And it all depends on who will get appointed to the helm of the US Fed and how he or she will lead the US central banking in the near future. That certainly determines the independence of central bank of the US. Also, it will influence the financial market around the world. And as we discussed, Korean financial markets and exchange rate, that depends upon that new Fed chair as well.
Right, which we'll probably find out this coming spring, as Celia was saying earlier on. All right, Professor Kim, thank you very much for your invaluable insights.
Thank you.
And Celia here in the studio, thank you very much for your time and thoughts. Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Be sure to join us again same time tomorrow.